Oh, I'm Wyatt. So
I'm Krista.
yeah, nice to meet you, Christa. Like I followed you for like quite a long time on Instagram,
Oh,
and so I'm very familiar with your work. I'm pretty excited to have you on. I was like literally on Instagram looking through who I follow, and I was like, I think they would be really cool to have on.
yeah. It's definitely a different kind of conversation than most, I suppose, about baits.
Yeah, and when we were chatting, uh,
Stupid. Hang on. Sorry, I have a motion light above me too.
yeah.
So I just turned on my other overhead light so it won't keep clicking off.
All right, perfect. So like when we were chatting, you mentioned you don't really fish a whole lot, and your husband is more of like the fisherman. Like, how does how did you get into painting baits then, if that's the case?
Yeah, so I came from a medical sales background originally. I worked in both medical device marketing and pharmaceutical sales for most of my career. And then I met my husband, and we had two kids pretty close together, so like 19 months apart. And as you know, daycare is pretty expensive. So a couple $1,000s a month, and I was still bringing home like a decent paycheck, but was very stressed and not really getting to spend a ton of time with my kids. So we decided to make a move from the Denver metro area down to Colorado Springs, where he was commuting to anyway, both because it was less expensive cost of living wise, and because he would be closer to work, and then we could live off one income tightly.
Hmm.
So so we did that. That's where he's from. So his dad lives there, and some of his other family. And so we made the move, and I was, kind of just hanging out with my kids. I always enjoyed painting when I was younger. I never really had an art background per se, but I took art classes and I had some good teachers in high school. And I had some friends who were artists, so artistic leaning, hobby wise. And so I was like painting rocks with my kids and just doing artsy stuff. And he's like, you would be really good at lure painting. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah, you should try it. Because him and his grandpa back in when he was a kid and a teenager, they used to paint lures with spray paint because his
Hmm.
dad or his grandpa back in like the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s made cedar lures
Yeah.
that were similar to Pose. Are you familiar with Pose cedar
Hmm.
crankbaits?
Hmm.
Yeah, so he used to make baits like that, and then also like spinner baits and lots of other different kinds of baits. We actually inherited a lot of those things that we still have to go get in Georgia. I don't know where we would put it. But anyways, so he had a little bit of a background in that, and suggested I be good at painting. I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. So he bought me all the stuff, and I just kind of took to it, and I learned. I was really frustrated at the beginning. I bought all the wrong stuff, and had to ask a lot of questions of people smarter than me online who are very kind. And so that's kind of how it all began in a way. My husband is an avid bass fisherman. He has been since he was old enough to hold a pole.
Hmm.
And so he knew a lot about the industry. And that helped a lot too, because he had some good advice as far as like what the market would want and stuff like that. So
Oh, that's
yeah.
really cool. And like that over in that like Georgia kind of, you know, Missouri, Lake of the Ozarks area. That's like prime country for like
Yeah.
flat-sided square bills, stuff like that. Handmade balsas, square bills, things like
Oh,
that.
is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know where they were living at the time for sure. His grandparents moved around some. They were originally up in Black Forest near Colorado Springs, but they've moved around some, and they've been in Georgia for quite some time now. So I know the fishing's good there. I've been trying to get my husband to go out there, but we haven't made it out there to fish yet since the kids were born. So,
Hmm. So who's been like some of your inspiration or who's helped you with your painting along the way?
oh, there's so many, and I'm so afraid to name names because I feel like I'm gonna leave people out,
Hmm.
um, and then I'm gonna feel really bad about it. So, some of the people that really helped me a lot early on, they're let me think here. So the guy that does JR Lures, who is not very active anymore,
Hmm.
used to do live painting videos, and he encouraged me to start doing live videos when I was first after I'd been painting for a little while, and
Hmm.
I didn't really have the setup, so it was really generic at first. If you go back to my old YouTube videos, you'll see like I'm painting in my kitchen because it's cold and our garage wasn't heated, and I didn't have the setup that I have now. And so I started doing those videos, and he was right. Like, I got a ton of engagement because I don't really fit the mold of your average like lure painter or anyone in the fishing industry in general.
Hmm.
So I got a lot of engagement just from sharers. People are like, check this out, check this girl out painting lures. And so I got a lot of views on those videos, and my husband helped a lot too because he shared my content in a lot of the groups that he was in and stuff, and maybe got in a little trouble along the way. And so I grew my following that way pretty fast. So I guess he was pretty instrumental in helping me early on in regards to marketing myself. But in regards to painting, I have several. So like Jen Cravasi's helped me a lot. Everybody knows
Yeah.
Jen. She owns Jekyll Baits and works for Bullshad. And then John Pryor is another that a lot of people might not know because he hasn't been painting for a while either. But he made a brief re-entry into the painting world several years ago, and he was really helpful. He's one of the OGs, and he's done work for Berkeley, helping come up with designs for them. And he helped me a lot. And Mark Collins is another one. If you follow the crankbait pages, he does some amazing handmade lures and also does repaints of some of the like Rapala balsa lures that go for big bucks with his paint. So he was always really supportive, and I got tips along the way from a lot of other people too. So I'm sure I left a ton of people out, but I could go on forever naming names. And then there's also lots of people that help me on the technical side with just the frustration that is airbrush art.
Yeah.
So, airbrushing is not, it's not for the impatient, let's just say. You have
Hmm.
to have a little bit of ability to control your frustration and power through. And a lot of people quit during that process because, it is easy to get angry and just give up. So there were several people along the way that helped me with those issues too.
Oh, for sure. I know when I first got my airbrush and was learning with it, I'm still like not very good. At least I don't think I'm very good. Um, just learning and getting everything down, learning like trigger control with how much air and paint come out, learning like what to say air compressor out so you can do different things. Like it's a huge learning curve. But with people like you, and Jen Kravasi and all these other painters, if you watch their videos or like you were doing lives, if you watch that, you can pick up a lot of things just by paying attention a little bit.
You can, and I'll be honest, I'm not a video watcher, and I haven't really watched very many YouTube videos on painting. A lot of I'm a learner by doing.
Hmm.
And so I have to really get in there and see it working to really understand it. And so I, like you asked me, one of the other questions, I'm not going to try to jump ahead, but was like, where do I get my inspiration? It's not, a lot of people watch the videos and try to copy the patterns, and I'm not accusing anybody of copying. I don't care if anybody copies anyway,
Hmm.
but like it's good to learn just how the process works, right? Just to follow the videos and copy what she's doing, what Jen's doing. She's so good at it. But I prefer to just like learn and burn, just guess. Like, I'm going to guess how this goes. And then I just give it a shot and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then I'm like, okay, well, I think I should have done this instead. And I'll go back and I'll redo it. And the beauty of plastic lures is you can just take, if you're using water-based paint, which is what I started with, I don't use it anymore. You can just take some rubbing alcohol and a paper towel or a rag and just wipe it off and start over. So,
Yeah, exactly. Because I know you'll see a lot of like different people try to mimic other people's style. Like Piz, he has a very like specific style of his
yeah.
painting.
Mm-hmm.
But you just gotta like make it your own. Like the only like I'm painting a G2 shell cracker, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna paint it like the throwback Swimbait's like pink lemonade color.
Mm-hmm.
But it's my own personal use. I'm not gonna go around and be like, oh, sell it or anything like that. That's the only thing. And like if I ever post about it, I'm gonna like, hey, this is like inspired by throwback, and things like that.
Yeah.
Give credit where credit's due.
Yeah. So yeah, it's such a touchy subject. And I get a lot of requests from people. They'll say, can you do this? And they'll send me a picture of somebody else's work. And so I'll tell them I can do something similar, but first of all, technically speaking, I can't really copy somebody else's work anyways, because I don't use the same paint as everybody else. Typically people are using like, Createx and stuff like that, or they're using automotive paint. Even like some people, are using automotive paints, and there's so many different variations. Like, it's almost impossible to guess what paint somebody used or what colors they used. And I don't feel good about that, right? Like, I don't feel good about ripping somebody else off. Now, if it's a color like Berkeley made or like Mega Bass made, sure. Like, I'll get as close as I can, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm totally okay with that because, I'm not, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a fine line, right? But I don't think most people really have a problem with a one-off copy of like a Baby Kingo, right? Color, because colors aren't trademarked, right? Colors are just like a bait can be trademarked or patented. We can't patent a color pattern or whatever. So it's hard to kind of feel that out. Like if it's like a whitish bait with like some tones, certain tones or whatever, then I'll try to do something similar for them. But then make sure they understand that I'm not going to be able to copy that exactly. But yeah, you should. I think trying to copy a painter's pattern is a good way to practice, just to see if you can figure out how to do it, how they did it or whatever. Because then you're learning how their process works, which in turn can help you learn how to fine tune your own.
For sure. And kind of like segueing into, you don't know what paints people are using. What's your setup? What kind of paints are you rocking? What airbrushes are you using?
Yeah, so some of these topics are a bit controversial because people don't want you to like give away your secrets per se. Yeah. So I'll tell you as much as I can. Mm-hmm. So I use all of Iwata Eclipses right now. So when I started out, I was using primarily Badger brushes. And I had a good, Michelle, she was a good supporter of me from like a like helping me with like issues that I had when I was first starting. She was good friends with the owner of Badger, Ken, and recommended that I use those. So I did. And he was very supportive, and I used his brushes for a long time, and I still have a lot of them. But in the meantime, I was fortunate enough to have a good friend, Bobby Martin, who works with Iwata Airbrush, and he's done a lot of like mural painting and stuff in the past, and he's a fisherman in Colorado here. He lives up in the Denver metro area, and he was able to, I think Ben Milliken also was in on this, get a sponsorship with Iwata for Ben and I, and get the name Awada out in the lure community more. So I started using exclusively Awadas at that time. And honestly, I see they're both really good brushes and you can't really go wrong either way. And so I've been rocking the Eclipse for pretty much the last year plus exclusively. And I get my maintenance done for me and all that stuff, which is super sweet. And I can't say good enough things about the Awada Eclipse. If you're starting out, either the Awada Eclipse, excuse me, or the Badger Patriot are the go-tos. And they come with a 0.3 millimeter needle nozzle combo, but they can be converted to a 0.5 with just a basic conversion kit that you can get online. And I have most of my brushes converted to 0.5, which surprises a lot of people because the detail that they think we're doing, would require a smaller, more detailed brush. But in reality, a lot of those really small diameter brushes, like the micron and the 0.3, are intended for like super fine detail on like you're drawing, tiger fur, like fur by fur, or like what strand by strand. And for lure painting, you really don't need that fine of detail because we're using a lot of stencils, doing a lot of shading, and stuff like that. And I find that 0.5 is a little more friendly when you're using pearls a lot, which we do with fish. And so I don't have to like constantly be thinking, oh, is my brush going to spray this or not?
Yeah.
Makes sense. So that's kind of my strategy with brushes. And then paint wise, I use mostly taxidermy paint. So it's lacquer based, which requires, a good strong vent fan, and also a half face respirator with vapor cartridges. And I always wear gloves as well because you don't want to touch your baits. You don't want to get your finger oils on them. It can affect the adhesion, so you don't want to get your finger gunk. You have oil on your hands whether you realize it or not. And I use primarily Lifetone paints and also polytransfer paints. And then I do use some automotive paints as well. So if there's a color I want that I can't get from the taxidermy world, which we're doing fish, so mostly I can, then I'll seek out just my local auto paint store. And that stuff's pretty expensive. So, with neons, I use some Custom Creative. Custom Creative makes some good lacquer neon paints and water-based as well. And those are available on spraygunner.com. So when I need to replenish neons, which I don't use a lot, that's kind of my go-to. So.
Yeah, because it seems like your paint jobs are a lot more natural, kind of, match the hatch kind of a vibe to them.
Very much so, yeah. Like the neons will occasionally people want like I just did a chartreuse purple for a customer of mine that wanted a custom color. It ended up on KGB's website because I ended up doing a batch of them for them, but which is like a chartreuse purple for dirty water. So it comes up here and there, but I'm not known for that kind of stuff anymore. So I do mostly, it's like 10 different colors that I use all the time for the most part.
Well, and then like when people start out painting, you touched on some really good things there. Like you got a lot of gunk on your hands, your natural oils and everything like that. So people don't always realize, hey, maybe I need to wear gloves throughout this whole process. And especially if you're buying like Swimbait blanks, you also have to really wash those baits as well. You have some fun videos of you have your bathtub full of baits and you're washing them with your kids.
Yeah. So there's some mistakes you make along the way too. Like you got to be careful how much you wash stuff like that because sometimes there's resin always has pinholes in it, and sometimes like some of the dust and debris will actually kind of fill those. And so if you overwash them, you can wash all that out, and then you end up creating more work for yourself. So these little things that you learn along the way can make a big difference. And the oils is one of them, especially if people are using epoxy. A lot of newer painters will start out with 2-part epoxy because it doesn't require a lot of equipment, to do epoxy. You just need to buy the 2-part epoxy, mix it, brush it on, and then some kind of rotating dryer so it doesn't run to the end of your bait or whatever is the bottom where you're hanging it from. But one big thing with epoxy is that if you do get oils on your bait, you'll get fish eyes in the epoxy, which is basically just like a crater. Wherever you stuck your finger on the bait, you'll have like a crater in the clear where it kind of just wants to avoid that spot. And so I'll get a lot of messages from people asking, like, why is my bait doing this? Or you'll see it in the forums on Facebook, the groups, where people ask that question all the time. And so you can't stress the importance enough of just wearing gloves. And you might be able to get away with not wearing gloves if you're using like automotive clear coat. But as a general rule for me, once the bait's been prepped, no more touchy. So yeah, gloves all the time.
No, that's like me. So like once I wash the bait, it's like gloves, but then I'm like putting out paper towels. I'm like setting my baits on a paper towel, covering it with the paper towel, trying not to have any contaminants on it before I paint. But also super important with having a respirator, because even with water-based acrylics, you don't want that stuff breathing that in. And when you're vaporizing, when your paint's getting vaporized like that, that stuff's everywhere and you don't even really realize.
Yeah, when I first started, I wasn't really careful about that either. I'm like, oh, it's water-based, so it's safe, right? And I mean, safer, maybe. Yeah. But anytime you're breathing in something extra from the air, be it like smoke or particulate matter, it's not great for you, right? So a little exposure is probably not a big deal, but over time, if you're going to be doing this on the regular, it's going to add up, And I really hesitated getting into lacquer paint. My good friend Kevin Hansis, he's a taxidermist, and he used to do lure painting for walleye baits, and he was pushing me to get into lacquer paint, use lacquer paint. He's a taxidermist, and that's what they use. And he's like, you'll never go back. And he was right. You never go back. And there's reasons for that. But I was hesitant because of like the exposure for my kids and myself. But once we moved and I got my own dedicated space and I was able to kind of up my game as far as ventilation went, I felt a little more comfortable doing that. And but you got to be safe, right? You can't.
Yeah.
You're not going to ever be 100% perfect about the exposure, but I think if you can do the best job you can, then it'll decrease your chances, because it is a risk. It's a risk of the job.
For sure. And yeah, just having safety precautions is always a good idea. And like with this hobby, you don't always like realize the risk. But you had in one of your YouTube videos, you say something like really interesting. You say, if it has an odor, you should probably wear a mask.
Yeah. And honestly too, this is interesting because I had a 3M rep come out to my house because I can't find a full face respirator that fits me. I still have not. So I'm in goggles and half face mask right now because even their customizable one doesn't work. My face is just too narrow. But there's a chemical called isocyanate, and it is in 2-part clear coat. And it's known to be very harmful to your brain. It kills brain cells like rapidly. And it doesn't have any smell at all. So with your respirators on your, so you have these, this is overkill. He also told me these are overkill. I don't need this one. But I've had a bunch of them, so I'm just going to finish using them. I think it's I don't want to say what the number is because I'll quote it wrong, but just their basic organic vapor filter is all you really need. But so the rule of thumb is these are good as long as you can't smell anything through them. But with isocyanate, it has no smell and it's small, so it can be coming through your cartridges and you don't even know it. And that's kind of scary if you think about it, because it's really bad stuff. Like that's the stuff you really don't want to get into your system, and it's only dangerous when it's airborne. So you got to make sure you're changing the filters, after like 40 hours of exposure or something like that. So I generally, as a rule, every time I go through a big clear coat session, like if I'm doing a batch of KGBs and I've clear coated all of them, filters go in the trash.
Mm-hmm.
And they're expensive, but your health is worth it. You got to put that first. So yeah, I'm a big person with safety, and a lot of people don't realize that it can get in your ears also. So, and your eyes. So anything, it's very water, it's attracted to water. I can't remember the name there's a term for that. Water seeking, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So it can't get in your pores, but it can get in your nose. It can get in your eyes, your ears, and your mouth. So all those things have to be sealed off. So for anybody that's thinking about using 2-part clear coat, this comes directly from the safety rep from 3M. That's what you got to do. So he even recommended that I do supplied air, but I haven't made that jump yet because that's really expensive and it's not comfortable. So
yeah, for sure. And so is that the clear coat you're using right now for your baits then?
Yeah, I use Tamco 9500, which is their high impact clear. It dries in 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't probably fish a bait in 30 minutes, but you could definitely pick it up, and pack it up if you wanted to, to ship it or whatever, which is really nice. It's nice to be able to not worry about them being sticky for days, because if you're using a slower drying clear, like they like to use a slower drying clear sometimes for cars because they want to be able to buff them, and they can't always get to it in 30 minutes because they got a whole car to do, So the high impact is like much faster. And so that's kind of the industry standard for clear right now. I think most, unless they're still using epoxy, which some of the garage bait builders do still use epoxy, and you can get a much thicker, smoother finish with epoxy if you're really good at it. And it's probably arguably better maybe in some cases. Like the musky guys will still use epoxy because they're constantly getting, bit by huge teeth. So, but from like a volume standpoint, it's a lot more time consuming and harder to use. So right now, Tamco is probably the hardest, most reliable, easiest to spray. It's 2 parts versus 3 parts, which some of the automotive clears are like a 3-part where you have to reduce it as well. And they take, at least 24 hours before you can touch it, but maybe arguably a week or 2 before they're fully hardened, which isn't ideal, turnaround wise. So
yeah, and so like a lot of the baits that I make, so I just have this like little balsa mouse that I made, and it's spinning right now because I did 2-part, use 2-part epoxy. And I find like the longer work time you have, so I used a 30-minute, the longer work time you use, the better your clear coat turns out for that.
Yeah.
But if I paint blanks or even some of the swim baits that I paint, I'll use it's KBS. It's it's I don't know, you can brush it on or you can dip it. I know Jen Kervasi uses it sometimes.
Yeah, so KBS is an interesting animal. It has its, every clear coat, I still say this to this day, clear coat is the hardest part of painting lures.
Yeah.
You can ruin your masterpiece in the flash, the blink of an eye, if your clear coat doesn't set right. And it's not uncommon for that to happen. And they all kind of have their little issues. So, like, number one, there are some epoxies that have absolutely no VOCs. And I started with art resin, and I also use True Coat. Those don't have any VOCs, so they're totally safe to use. Both are really good. Like with epoxy, you only have so much time, like you said, and if you don't get it on in enough time, then it starts to set up, and you kind of just have to remix it, a new batch, which is not good if you're in the middle of clear coating something. So that's tricky. And then also the contamination issues. So it is very sensitive to contamination issues. And then you have to rotate them as well, because it won't be an even, it's not self-leveling, right? Yeah. So it'll, to some degree, self-level, but also gravity will do what it does because it takes so long to set up fully. And then there's KBS, which a lot of crankbait painters and smaller bait painters use. And it has, the issue with it is that you have to be so careful how you store it. And have you had this issue?
I haven't had an issue because, like, I watched a video from Jen, and so I have it in, like, a jar with, like, saran wrap on top and then the lid, and it's, like, in the darkest, deepest corner of my desk.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. I haven't used KBS. I'll be really honest. I've never used it. The first reason I didn't use it was because I heard the fumes were really bad, and I was really trying to be careful about that when I first started, because I didn't have like the setup for, harsh chemicals and whatnot. And then also I heard about the storage issues, and I was like, oh, that's just going to throw me off the deep end. I can't do it. So you have to be really careful how you store it. Make sure you research that if anybody's watching and they want to try KBS. And then the bubbles is another thing that people complain about. You can get like a heat gun and pop them right. I mean, that works okay, right?
I've had bubbles, and I'm not like, so with the bubbles, like if you're dipping like a crankbait or a jerkbait, like the slower that you like dip it in and then pull it out, you don't have those issues as much. But with like brushing on, you tend to have like some issues with bubbles and stuff like that.
I would have thought it would be the other way around. Interesting, because usually like brushing, you can kind of pop the bubbles as you go, but maybe it reacts differently than other clear coats I've used.
I don't know. When I've brushed it on, I've had it set up real fast, and I'm like, So
okay.
I've had some issues with it. It's not my favorite thing to use, but it's super convenient for like dipping like a crankbait.
Right. So, the other one is UV resin. So when I was doing smaller baits, I used UV resin. And UV resin is great, but again, it has its issues. So a friend of mine in Minnesota made 2 big lure boxes for us, like light boxes. And he was so nice. Like I've been so blessed. Like so many people have been so nice to me, and I don't know why. Like I guess maybe because I help other people learn that other people feel like being nice back, which is great. Like that's a good way to live, right? So he built this. He was kind of a carpenter and built this. His name's Scott. He built this. I have it over here. You can't see it right now, but it's like 4 feet long, and it's just long enough for the solar cure bulbs, which they're meant for grow houses for marijuana. That's the perfect light wavelength for UV resin, and you have to be really careful about what NM. And I can't remember the exact number that you're supposed to use, but there's a very specific wavelength you're supposed to use for curing resin. And so these are expensive, but if you're doing a lot, then you want it right. So we decided to do it right. So we bought a big batch of the bulbs, like an 8-pack or something, and he built these boxes and he shipped it to me. And I just paid materials and shipping and stuff. So I have these bulbs, like 3 on one side and 3 on the other side, which ended up going down to 2 because I had an electrical issue. But, you take this can of UV resin, which you can't expose to the light at all. right? It's in like a silver can. You can't have any window light coming in. You can't have cracks of light coming in, nothing. And I would, dip them. You have to dip them with like, you have your bait attached to a paper. Here, I'll show you this. Like a bait attached to a paper clip. You dip, just like KBS, pull it out, and then hang it over the jar and just let all the excess drip. Now that's one thing you can't do with KBS. You have to just let the waste be waste. And so you save material that way. And then once it's like down to almost no drips, then you hang it in the light box. And after about 30 minutes max, and you have to have it really close to the light, within a couple inches or so, it'll be ready to go. And so that's really nice. But you also have issues of like the eyelets being clogged. So when you're done, all the eyelets are clogged. So you have to either clear those before you hang it up, or you have to clear them with a Dremel bit. That's kind of hard to find afterwards. So it's extra work in that regard. But that's a really good way to clear coat baits if you're impatient and you want it to be fast. Mm-hmm. But you run the risk, of course, you run the risk of curing all of the resin in your jar if you expose it to light, and it doesn't take much. And that's happened to me many times. So that's a downside, and it's expensive too. And then all the lights and all that's expensive too. So there's the ups and downs to everything. And then when you get to the automotive clear coats, those are super easy to use, but very toxic. So, there's your downside right there.
Yeah. And KBS is a little on the pricier side versus, two-part epoxy. You can get that, at a hobby store or, Joann's or, any of those Hobby Lobby, stuff like that.
Yeah, just very easy to access it and stuff. There are cheaper automotive clear coats that you can get, like Finish One by Sherwin-Williams is really good, actually. It does take a little longer to cure, but it's pretty fast. And it's not that expensive compared to like the Tamcos and stuff. But like, yeah, I guess it's worth the money to just go with something for me that I know is gonna do the job, and the people I work for prefer that's what I use. So
yeah, exactly. Especially since you're working with these bait makers and you're sending out baits, like these custom painted baits to these different customers. They're not cheap. Mm-mm. I will say, like, this is kind of my little tip for any of the listeners out there. So for the two-part epoxy and what I've been using is I also build fishing rods. And so when you get a rod turner, because you're putting epoxy on your guides, like that takes forever to dry. It takes like a whole day. And you can like take that rod turner though, and you can take a wooden dowel and you can have your lure turn that way. And so it levels out, like your epoxy levels out and everything. And it's a lot cheaper than, they're relatively inexpensive for what they are.
Yeah. I mean, epoxy for sure is the easiest way to get started, I think.
So what all bait makers are you working with right now? I know I've seen like Throwback and KGB.
Yeah. So my primary employer is KGB Swimbaits. I do more baits for them than I do for anyone. So I started out doing swim baits. I did crankbaits and just jerk baits and sold stuff on my website for a long time, for many years. And then swim baits really started to become a thing. And I started thinking about whether I should get involved in that or not. And so I started dipping my toes a little bit and posting some of my work on some of the groups. And I got a little interest. And so I started doing a few like repaints and stuff. And found that, I was getting more and more and more business. And so I kind of made the switch at that point because, it's guaranteed money versus like when you're selling something if I'm selling something on my website, I have to wait for the buyer, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I did sell quite a bit, but it requires a lot more marketing yourself, a lot
Mm-hmm.
more time online. Um, and so it wasn't a way that I was going to be able to grow anymore. I mean, I maybe, but not, at a level that I would like to grow. And so, it was the next logical step for me. And then it just kind of blew up after that. I just kept doing it and doing it and got busier and busier. And then eventually, was lucky enough to get asked to start painting baits for KGB because they were going through an expansion. They grew their capacity to build baits on a larger scale, and they had two painters already. So Peyton Stumpf and David. Why I'm like I always blank on everybody's last names. It doesn't matter, but he's not really on Facebook much or anyway, so you wouldn't know him very well. But they were his two primary painters, and they were pretty busy. So I came on, and so I do about 200 or so a month for him right now. Whatever Kevin asks is what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And then in between those, I've been just I had done some work for Throwback a little while back, and then he had kind of gone back to doing his own paint. And then I think they're producing an amount now where it's gotten overwhelming
Mm-hmm.
for Kyle, because I think he was doing the painting himself. I mean, a lot of this stuff I'm not even sure if it's correct or not. So they reached out to me to start doing some more. And so I've been doing about 100 a month of theirs. And then some smaller bait manufacturers I've done some smaller batches for. There's quite a lot, so I don't know if I can name them all.
Mm-hmm.
But I've done several batches for Willie Pete's, which you've probably seen him posting his stuff a lot. I'm trying to remember all of them. There's so many.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, a lot. So that's where I'm at right now. And then in between all of those batches, then I just do a few customs here and there when I have time, but people have to be really understanding of where my priorities lie as
Yeah.
far as my, return time goes. So I have to be honest and say, hey, it just depends when I get these batches, because I don't always know when they're coming way in advance or anything.
Mm-hmm. It's like I have 200 like KGB chads or whatever to paint. Like I'm not able to do your Hinkle shad right now or whatever.
Yeah. Most people are pretty understanding. I think in general, the people who are big into the swim bait, they kind of know that I work for KGB already and Throwback also. And so they're aware that when they message me, it's probably not going to be like a week, So I don't get too much impatience from people in that regard. Like if they're going to send it to me, they know in advance that like it's not going to be quick. So that's when I was doing like more customs and not batches so much, then it was a lot more of that impatience. You know what I mean? Where people wanted everything right now, or they thought that 4 weeks was crazy. And I'm like, 4 weeks is not crazy, really. So
No, exactly. And with your customs that you do, is there any like particular baits that you really like to paint?
when I get like custom paint, like
Yeah.
repaint.
Yeah, so like when people send stuff in, do you like to do Hinkles or like anything like that? Kind of what's your favorite bait to paint?
God, it's so hard. That's a hard question too. There's so many now,
Mm-hmm.
It's just such an amazing thing to see how much this industry has grown and just keeps growing. And, even my own husband, who has fished his whole life, never really was into big baits. And he was always kind of afraid to get into it because he knew once he did, he was going to spend a fortune. And so I stupidly bought him his first swim bait rod and reel combo for his birthday and Father's Day. And I think I just opened a can of worms because now he loves it. So it's very addicting. So I get so many different ones. I mean, what do I like to paint? So my favorite things to paint are the smooth ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because I think that they're better. It's because my paint looks better on them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The smooth, there's an advantage to a textured finish. It requires less perfection on the finish because it doesn't show imperfections as much. And also the paint sticks better to a textured bait than a smooth bait. It's easier to get paint to stick to the textured baits. The smooth surface is just kind of finicky when it comes to adhesion.
Mm-hmm.
But they're so nice to paint on because you can just like make it. I love that OG look like you've seen. Here, I'll just hold this one up. So like this is my husband's. He managed to talk me out of one of these, and this has been fish. But like this is kind of like the OG style, where it's super clean.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have like a lot going on. It's just like really smooth, and the scales are like nice and perfect, and everything is really, I don't know, simple kind of. And that stuff just looks really good on a smooth surface. So that's the short answer, I think.
Yeah, and you can do like your scaling like a lot easier on like a smooth bait.
It shows up better.
Mm-hmm.
It shows up more like some of the, like a hinkle. You can put a scale pattern on a hinkle and can't even tell you did it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even look like you tried. I mean, it still gives you a layered look a bit when you put scale material over top, but it doesn't look like scale material, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So.
No, with your husband, I thought it was really funny because you had a story up on your Instagram where you painted a bait and then they got sent out and he ended up buying one of those baits off like Tackle Warehouse. It's like a throwback or something.
Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Yes. So he saw it online. He's like, "Did you paint that?" And I'm like, "You saw him like hanging in the garage," but he doesn't pay attention, And he didn't tell me he was going to buy one, but he did. And he like didn't tell me until we were in the boat fishing. I think the kids were at the grandparents and we were fishing. And he holds up a fish with the bait and showed it to me. And he's like, "Does this bait look familiar?" Because I didn't even notice at first. And I was like, "Oh my God, what the heck?" And he's like, "I just had to have one. I thought you'd be mad." And I'm like, "Oh, why would I be mad?" It's just funny that it made that trip from like my garage back to KGB to Tackle Warehouse back to my house.
Yeah.
So
no, that's really funny. And you're mentioning you don't fish much, but like when you do go out and fish with your family, like how does that look? Are you guys throwing swim baits? Are you guys beating the bank?
Yeah, so we have a ranger. My husband, like I said, he used to run tournaments. So for a while, he ran the Colorado region of the American Bass Association.
Mm-hmm.
And he stopped doing that last year just because, I don't know, kind of sucks the joy out of it for you a little bit. Just going, making it a job. It's like when you make your hobby a job, it kind of sucks the joy out of it a little bit. And it was just kind of overwhelming. So he passed the torch on to someone else who was really interested in taking over. And so he has all the stuff. He's got a boat for tournament fishing and stuff like that. So we're lucky enough now that we live right by the reservoir. It's Lake Pueblo State Park. So we're in southern Colorado. And the marina is only about 5 miles from our house. Mm-hmm. So we can literally just pop over there any evening or a couple hours on the weekends to avoid the traffic. In the day, we'll just go in the evenings or early in the morning or whatever. And my son is really into fishing. My husband, I think, was kind of determined when he found out that he had a boy that he was going to get him into fishing. I mean, he tried to get our daughter into it too, and she did like it when she was a kid. But as she got older, I guess, her interest waned a little bit, and it was too boring. So So he takes my son all the time. Just the two of them go a lot. And they fish, it just really depends on the conditions and what's biting. They fish a lot of plastics, spinner baits, chatter baits. And then he's finally let my son start using treble hooks.
Yeah.
Because you know how do you have kids?
No, but I work with kids, and then a
Oh,
couple
that's what
weeks
you said.
ago,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So you take them fishing sometimes?
my kids that I work with are in prison.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you do corrections.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's terrifying. I mean, it's
Hmm.
terrifying. Like when my son was little, I would always be like this, you know? And so he wasn't allowed to use treble hooks for a long time because it's much easier to get a single hook than a treble hook
Hmm.
if you get stuck in something or someone or the dog, which has happened once. And so now he's even using swim baits, and he really likes it too, but smaller ones, you know, because he's smaller.
Hmm.
But my son, who's 9, actually learned how to throw with the bait caster when he was like 8. He just turned 8. Um, and so he uses both now. I can't throw a bait caster. I'm so embarrassed to admit that, but I can't. I've never learned, and I probably need to. But I just throw a spinning reel, and if I throw some bait, then I'll just use like a heavier rod or whatever. But I don't fish a lot. A lot of times, if we're usually with the kids, so it's the 4 of us, and I'm usually like snack duty, picture duty, video duty, like get me a new lure duty, you know. My son is pretty self-sufficient. He doesn't really ask me for help anymore. He's 9 now. He just turned 9. You know, but if my daughter needs help, then usually I have to help her. And then we usually have a dog in there too, so it's kind of crazy. So if the whole family's there, I don't really usually fish much. I might throw a few casts here and there, but it's really crowded. Um, but if my husband and I get a chance to, if the kids are with the parents and we have time, we'll go out alone. And then I do like to throw some swim baits, but again, I don't throw anything real big.
Hmm.
So I really like fishing crankbaits, but unfortunately, they don't work that great where we are.
Yeah.
So,
No, like my buddy Michael that was out here a couple weeks ago. Like the trout fishing right now is just phenomenal,
oh,
and we went out and like first 10 minutes his 6-year-old who's been fishing most of his life at this point, and it's just the kid's a hammer. First 10 minutes he catches like his biggest rainbow trout, which was like 20 and a half inches, and it
oh
just
wow.
kind of, yeah, started the day off for us. And then he's like,
That's
yo,
awesome,
it
though. Did you
was,
get a video? Did you get a
yeah,
video?
yeah, we got like some good video. We got like really good pictures. Got a good release on the fish too. We're in like a pretty great area. Like I live
Hmm.
up in South Dakota in the Black Hills, like Mount Rushmore area,
Hmm.
and like we have a super underrated fisheries, like trout fisheries out here.
Oh wow.
So
I could see that. I could see that though. Like, are you guys at elevation at all?
yeah, so like a lot of our lakes are classified as alpine lakes up here because we're at a
Mhm.
higher elevation than the rest of the state.
Yeah, it's funny. So whenever I tell people that I own a lure company and that because I live in Colorado, everybody always when they introduce me, they'll be like, "Yeah, so she makes flies and stuff." Like it's just where their brain goes immediately. Because of where I live. And I'm like, no, actually, I've never tied a fly in my life. I actually I paint bass lures, like bass fishing lures. Oh, okay. And it's funny how their brain, is that kind of how it is where you are, like with trout fishing?
Yeah, so like a lot of when we go out, like when my buddy was out, he was fly fishing, but and his kid was throwing spinning gear, but I had like BFS, like the bait finesse, like little lures, and then I was throwing a depths 115, which is like the smaller depth slide swimmer,
Yeah. Mhm.
and I've caught a couple trout on that, and it's really cool to see trout
That's wild.
following your glide bait. So a lot of the trout
I
fishing.
haven't seen that. I've never seen that happen.
Yeah, it's crazy. So it's kind of like how with like bass fishing is, where those glide baits have a lot of drawing power,
Mm.
and
Yeah, a lot of
yeah,
follows just to get
hmm
him to like strike is another. That's the hard part.
yeah, and we when my buddy was out here, his son was like, "Well, let me try your swim baits. Let me try like your BFS setup." And he was throwing that bait caster and like some bird's nests here and there, but he like picked it up pretty quick. But
How
like
old again?
he's like 6.
6?
Yeah, but like fishing most of his life. So,
Yeah. Wow. We didn't even. My son is like very. He has a really hair trigger temper when it comes to frustration,
mhm.
and so we didn't even consider it at that age because there's no. It would have been a nightmare. I mean, it was a nightmare anyway. When he gets a bird's nest, but um, 6 is crazy.
Yeah, honestly, I think swim baits are a lot easier to throw on a bait caster
Yeah,
versus your conventional stuff.
of
But then,
course. Yeah.
yeah, but then when you switch over to BFS, that's a totally different animal. Your casting is way different because you're.
Explain what BFS is because you're. I mean, I don't even know what that means.
Oh, so like BFS is bait finesse system.
Oh.
So it's a technique that started in Japan, and basically it's ultra light bait cast fishing.
Oh. Maybe
So
I need
like
that.
yeah, so like in Japan they have like the mountain streams and they have their own like species of trout that they fish for. And so they're using like ultra light, uh really whippy rods and catching trout on, like little jerk baits, like little mega bass jerk baits, things like that. So yeah, I went to the local tackle shop and was explaining to like the owner what BFS was because like a lot of people out here like fly fish or they're soaking power bait, so it's not really something. A lot of people aren't throwing BFS, and a lot of people aren't throwing swim baits out in my area.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So, there's so many different products in the fishing industry, and so many different swim bait brands and bait brands. And people will message me and they'll say, "Hey, I have this bait. Can you paint it?" And I'm like, "No, I got to Google it because I have no idea what that is." You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like, hold up, let me. Are you on like Swimbait Universe at all?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, let me look this up on Universe real quick. See
I
if
usually
it's
go
a.
to just Google first. And then, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I'll just be like, I'll just ask them what it is because
Mhm.
I just don't have the time to do the research. But it also makes me feel kind of dumb because I'm like, I mean, this is the industry I work in. I should know these things. But like, I don't have time to be on Swimbait Universe all the time. So I
Mhm.
miss a lot just because I'm working and I got 2 kids and I just don't have time to read all the posts sometimes.
Yeah,
So I miss
like
a lot of new stuff.
yeah, like I was trying to trade a bait, and this guy was like, "Well, what are you looking for?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm looking for a chocolate Jordan." And he was like, "What? Like
I don't
Jordans?
know.
Like the shoes?" And I'm like, "No, chocolate swim baits, dude.
Oh.
I want their crankbait or their like crank down swim bait." And he's like, "Oh, I thought you were talking about shoes, my guy."
Chocolate. I haven't heard that name. Some of these brands kind of come and go.
Mhm.
Like the builders will be really active for a period of time and then they kind of just drop off. And then they kind of come back with like a batch and then they just drop off again. So, or they just maybe are making so many they don't need any new customers because the people that buy from them are following them and they just snatch them up.
Mhm.
So it's weird. Like the names that disappear and come back. Like Pat's is another one.
Yeah, like all the pad stuff goes for super crazy prices still, like on Universe and on Underground.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, and Rafa's, like, I don't ever see him posted, but like, I know he's still around, you know?
Hmm.
So, I don't know, it's interesting.
Um, well, and then like over on the bait finesse side, the last person that I had on the podcast was uh, his name's Aaron, and he's from Arab Baits, and he makes this like 2.5 inch resin tiny glide bait.
Okay, I've seen this. Where does he sell it? Because I've seen this recently.
So I think primarily he's just on Instagram, and he has like his pictures are just like super aesthetic. It's usually just his bait and a black background, but they're just like
Yeah.
little resin baits, little tiny glide baits.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I've seen him like in the last week, and I can't remember where I saw him on. Maybe it was on Facebook, but I don't remember exactly, or Instagram. But I did. I saw him somewhere, and I can't remember where it was. But do they kind of have like that similar eye to the throwback?
Yeah, they just have like the black like kind of angry eye. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're
So when I
super
saw
cool.
the picture originally, and I saw the price, like I didn't realize the size. And then I kind of started reading a little more, and I was like, oh, these are tiny, because there's no perspective in the picture.
Hmm.
So that's a cool idea though, because I don't think anybody's done that.
Yeah, there's only like a couple people that I've really seen. It's super new yet,
Mm.
and I have a couple. I have like two of them that I was able to get on a drop for, but I'm just really hesitant to. And he said the same thing. He's like, when you have a bait that small, they're hard to paint because I don't know. I'll probably just have to do like not a
Mhm.
ton of detail or anything. Just maybe do like one color with some scaling. Just try my best.
Mm. He hasn't had me paint mine yet. So I started on tiny stuff.
uh,
So, it is definitely harder. I will give him that, because you got to squeeze that detail into a tiny space. But it's doable. It's doable. But I mean, like when you're first learning, it's hard.
yeah.
So,
So like, what does your pricing look like for when you do custom work?
and then when I'm doing customs for just people who want to send me a blank or a repaint, if it's like in the 6 to 8 inch range, like a standard glide bait, then I charge $40 plus return shipping. If it's significantly smaller, like Tiny Tom or something like a cheat code, then I can usually knock some down because it's so tiny. But in reality, like the size of the bait going smaller doesn't really change the amount of work that I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I still got to tape the eyes. I still got to tape the tail. I still got to prep it. I still got to paint it. I still got to clear it. The material costs are not significantly different, and the amount of work for me isn't significantly different. I think I just dropped the price a little, kind of like as a courtesy, because I know the bait doesn't cost them as much.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not wanting to charge them like, almost the cost of the whole bait to paint it. And then if it gets bigger, significantly bigger than 8 inches, then my pricing kind of becomes variable depending on what it is. Because like repainting a king, now you're talking a lot of clear coat.
Yeah.
There's a lot of clear coat. And my clear coat is like $350 a gallon or something like that. So it's not cheap. And also the paint's not cheap. Like Createx paint is pretty cheap. It doesn't last forever, so you do have to replace it when it kind of dries out or whatever, it starts to clump up. But lacquer paint is like taxidermy paint is like $14 for 8 ounces,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not reducing it significantly. So I go through a fair amount of paint, and it's not cheap paint. It's worth the cost because it's a lot easier to spray, and it dries in seconds versus like the hair dryer. Oh, like wait forever. But it does cost more. So like if the bait gets really big and we got a king or something that's huge, then I might bump my price up like $10.
Yeah.
you know. And if it's huge, if it's like a ghost, like I've done a couple of DRT ghosts, then it might be like $60 because that's a beast.
Yeah, those things are huge.
So, but yeah, that's my prices, and I haven't really changed my price that much. I think when I first started doing custom swim baits, I charged like $35. But I quickly realized that that was low, you know, for when you're doing customs, it's more work. So like I make a little more. It's not a huge difference, but I make a little, well, sometimes, but I make a little more with customs, but people have to realize that like it takes so much more time because I have to, you know, I got to look, what color does this guy want on number 1, number 2, number 3. They're all different, right? So I got to do them one at a time. And so it's a lot of paint changes. It's a lot of mental work. It just takes so much longer to do customs.
Do you think repaints are easier to do versus blanks?
No, they're not. Some are much harder than others, depending on what condition they come in. So I always ask people like, what kind of shape is it in? Because like, I want to know what I'm getting myself into before I get started. So like, if it just has a few like chips and stuff, usually I can just fix those with, I just use like, it's kind of like Bondo glazing putty, but I use an automotive, you have to get it at an automotive store because they make one called Combi Putty that comes in like a olive drab color. It's like a green gray color,
Mm-hmm.
which I prefer over the red because the red is harder to cover with paint. It's much more expensive, but to me, like those little conveniences are worth a little extra money. So I can kind of fill them in with that and then just kind of smooth it over. So like if it has a lot of hook rash, then I got to fix that. Or if it has paint chips, I got to fix that. I'm looking at my wall right now because I have a bunch of customs that are partially prepped that I'm working on right now. Or I've had some where people will spray paint them. Like, don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. So if somebody wants to send me that, then like I'll make them prep it for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I'm like, you need to get off as much as possible, and be aware like when you get it back, the finish isn't going to be as good as this. You know, when I return it to you, it's not going to look perfect because I'm not going to sit there for 10 hours getting it like perfect. And you can only sand resin so much too, because if you take off too much of the material, you could ruin it. You know, you could throw the weight off. You could, I don't know, just ruin it. So yeah, you have to be careful. So yeah, repaints are more work. If they're, I get some repaints from some people who like, they don't even look like they've been fished maybe once or twice. And those are pretty easy for the most part. You just have to cover the eyes with tape and cover the tail and then sand them down so the surface is rough. I don't strip baits. I tell people that in advance. Like I'm not going to strip a resin bait. Like I'm just not going to do it. If that's what you want done, then send it to somebody else. But I don't know anybody else who's going to do that. I think any one person that would do them would strip them. But I don't think he's even doing repaints anymore. So,
no.
Yeah.
Do you get like any of the, because you'll see like baits posted on like underground where the rash is so bad it's eating into the resin and has like huge half circles ate out of the resin. You get any of those?
You know, I find that type of person doesn't care about the rash and they don't care about the paint. So they probably aren't going to send it to me. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. They're like, send it. It still works. Just send it. You know what I mean? There's two different kinds of people. There's There's the people that want it to look as realistic as possible. They want it to be just nice and smooth, nice and perfect. And then there's the people who truly believe that the bait itself and its the way it swims, how it's tuned and designed is the reason why the fish are biting it. And I don't know the answer if the details and appearance are part of it or if it's just the bait itself. There's two schools of thought there, you know? So I think the people that are going to let their baits get to that, they're kind of proud of it, you know? They're proud of that rash, and they're not going to send it to me. So no, I don't get anything. I've never gotten anything in that bad shape. But I could fix it. You know, I could fix it. It just takes a little bit of filler. So no big deal. Fly.
So as far as like your family goes, you know, I've seen you like with the kids washing the baits in the bathtub, like I said earlier. But how involved do you have them get into it? Are they interested in painting it all with you?
No.
No?
No. So they've been watching me do this since they were like toddlers. And they have, you know, occasionally they'll be like, "Can I paint a bait, Mom?" And I'll let them go. And I have a big cabinet full of blanks, all kinds of different stuff. And I'll let them pick what they want as long as it's not something that I plan to sell. You know, I have a lot of random stuff that I have been there for a long time. And here's a couple they painted, actually. My daughter painted this one. So this is just like a cheap Swimbait blank that she painted. And I just get the water-based paints out for them. I don't let them use the lacquer paints. So I hate switching, though, because your brush gets all screwed up. You got to, like, break it down and clean it, because lacquer paint and water-based paint do not like each other.
Yeah.
And so once they've used my brush, I have to break it down and clean the whole thing before I can use it again. And I think my son did this one. So as you can see, their technique is not great, but they do have fun with it sometimes. And I've sold a couple of theirs. I need to sell those because people will buy them just to, like, you know, because it's cute, and like the kids will get like $10 or $20 or whatever. So every once in a while they do, but they haven't gotten real interested in it. I'd be more than happy to offer them a job at some point prepping baits. But at this age, it's just too boring for them, I think, you know? Like they might want to paint one bait or two baits, but then they're done. And they don't want to clean up either. So my kids are 10 and 9. So, you know, they're around it all the time. I think it's like one of those things that you see every day. It becomes less interesting to you. Like if you brought somebody else's kid in here who was never seen this before, they'd be a lot more interested, I think, and playing around.
Yeah, so like when my buddy was over, they came over to our place, and I was showing them like all the swim baits and like some of the painting I do, and his 6-year-old was like, "Oh, this is so cool," and I was like, "Here's some blanks," because my buddy's dad paints like walleye baits. So I was like, here's like a square bill, and here's a plopper style bait. Like you can go and fish, like paint these with your grandpa and whatever, and then go out to the river and catch some smallies on it. And then I threw him some like cheaper swim baits too. And then I was texting my buddy. I was like, cause his dad is this big walleye guide on the river here in South Dakota. And so he's sponsored by Pure Fishing. And so I was like, well, if I was to get like an Abu Garcia setup, like this is the rod, this is the reel that I would get. So I like threw some cheap swim baits at him, like catch some huge smallies on these for me.
Cute. So, did you said that you gave him paints? Did you have him paint?
No, I just gave him some blanks that I had laying around. Like I had some.
I thought you were going to take me into the story about him painting, and I was going to ask you how long they lasted before they got bored or mad.
No, so like his like my buddy Michael, his dad paints walleye lures and stuff like that. So he has like a whole setup and, paints his own lures for, some of his guiding and stuff like that.
Hmm. Yeah. I
So,
did some walleye stuff too. So we actually live on a big walleye lake here. Lake Pueblo is kind of known for walleye fishing. We have one of the biggest hatcheries in Colorado at Lake Pueblo State Park, and so there's a huge walleye hatch every year out here, and they stock a lot. And so I still do some walleye stuff because I sell a few of my baits and there's a general store down the street.
hmm
So I do still sell some of my baits over there. So occasionally I do still do some bright minnows and stuff like that for their store. And I have done some, like I used to sell walleye baits on my website, but I haven't been doing much of that stuff for a long time. But those guys some of those guys make a ton of money doing painting walleye baits with the custom crazy colors and stuff.
Yeah, like I've done a couple like walleye colors for my uncle. He sent me some blanks,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't remember like where they're from, but they were like resin blanks of
Oh,
some like walleye crankbaits. And I did like the Wonder Bread, where it's like all the like different colored dots, like red and yellow and whatnot. And
the dots in fluorescent are so hard. I feel like
mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah, I
so
was
hard
like,
not to get them to spider because the fluorescent is so hard to see on top of the
mm-hmm,
white.
mm-hmm.
And then if you put too much paint on, then it starts to spider. So you have to be really careful.
Yeah, I was like, damn it,
Yes.
damn it.
Yeah. Yeah. And even still, if I were to put water-based paints in a gun and try and do a Wonder Bread, I would probably do the same thing. Still spider it. It's an art. So
Yeah,
no, I mean it's
yeah, and
hard.
then did some like clown. Clown's kind of a fun
Yeah.
color to do. It's really easy.
Hmm.
Um, and some perch and stuff like that. But yeah, he hasn't sent me any pictures of his catches, so it's like, are you even using
Oh.
these?
I think the walleye guys are better about sending you pictures than the bass guys are.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because they're not in a hurry because they're usually keeping their fish. Like and like I feel like bass guys just take the bait out. They take the bait out of the mouth like right away, you know, before they can even think about taking a picture. But the walleye guys have to be careful because there's teeth involved,
hmm
so they have a little more time.
No,
So.
for sure. Well, kind of wrapping up here. Like, what are you working on right now? Like, what do you got going on?
So I just sent a batch back to Throwback. So they have a couple colors of Metros that they're going to be posting soon that I painted, and I just finished selling my portion of those. So those are sold. So I am prepping a batch. I have about like 20, a little over 20 customs that were ready to be painted that I got to do. And so I'll try and get those done this week. And then I have some more KGBs and some more throwbacks on the way. So that's pretty much my cycle anymore, is just whenever I have a week in between, batches, then I'll just do a few customs or a small batch from a builder. And then I go roll right into the next large batch. So generally my KGBs will always take priority just because that's my main employer. That's who
hmm
pays the bills. And then throwbacks as well. And then whenever I have some free time, I'll do the customs in between. So that's what I'm working on right now. I've got a variety of stuff hanging up here. Um, yeah, from many different kinds. So yeah, that's what I'm working on right now.
Oh, one question that I did want to ask that I kind of forgot until now is, have you ever tried to dabble in the painting of like the soft plastic lures, like the Huddlestons, Nates,
Mm-hmm.
Working Class Zero? How does that been going? If you've tried it.
Yes. So yes, I have. I painted quite a few actually, and I do have the paint for it. but I don't like to do them is the short answer. The paint that you have to use is it's from Lure Works, and it's called like I can never think of the name of things when I'm on a camera for some reason. I had the same problem when I was doing lives, but they have this one stuff that's called Lure Coat, which is a water-based product. But with that, you have to dip the bait in plastisol after you use it. And then the other stuff is, hang on 1 second. I'm just gonna look at the bottle. It's called, oh yeah, okay. Sorry, I always have a brain before I write these things down. SB Coat by Lure Works. And it is the most toxic stuff I've ever used. And it is designed to actually adhere with the soft plastic material. So it doesn't require any top coat or clear coat. And it works really well, but it's very toxic. It spiders when it comes out of your airbrush. So not spiders as in like when it hits the bait, like it spreads, but as in it creates a spider web of material around you when you spray it. So it like kind of dries in the air. It's so weird. So your paint booth will be covered in all these like spider webs when you get done spraying it. It works really well. A lot of people will think that you can paint like a burrito with it, but burritos are silicone. Mm-hmm. So it has to be soft plastic. So it'll work on like a Depths 250. It'll work on like the Citizens, I think I've done those. Yeah, I've done those before. And then I actually used to sell some soft plastics. I had a guy in Denver who was pouring some stuff for me. And my husband actually can pour them too, but he just doesn't have a lot of time to do it. But I have a whole bunch of these 7-inch swim baits, and I did paint many of those to sell, but they just really weren't moving very fast. And I kind of lost interest because I hate painting with that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've done Huddlestones as well, and they turn out pretty well. It's, you got the colors you got, and there's only so many that you can get. So you're a little bit limited in that regard, but I mean, I can make it look pretty good, close to as good as a regular swim bait, but maybe just not quite the detail. But yeah, it works. Not my favorite thing to do. So
yeah, I was like looking up how to do it one time, and I was like, this just seems like a bigger hassle than what I want to get into.
It is. And I think if it's not something that you're interested in like pursuing on a large scale, I wouldn't probably bother with it. Like a lot of these guys who are doing the really cool colors in the soft bait world, like Chris Jones, you've seen his stuff?
Yeah.
Are just pouring the colors, or I think they dust the molds, don't they? With like
there's different like powder pigments that they can use and stuff like that.
Yeah, they do some really cool stuff. It's amazing. I just love the art of it. I just love trying to like figure out how breaking down the process of like, how do they do that? But that's really amazing what they do. And I don't know how people tolerate the smell of plastisol, because I can't. It gives me an instant migraine. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I don't know how dangerous it is or isn't, but I can't handle it. So I'll leave that one to them.
No, for sure. Well, thank you so much for hopping on.
Yeah.
I think this was amazing. Where can people find you at?
So I am mostly active on Instagram and Facebook at Colorado Custom Lures. And I do have a TikTok. I'm not real good about posting there because I don't really use TikTok. I'm Gen X, so all these changes are hard for me. And then my website is coloradocustomlures.com. If people ever want to know when I'm going to be posting like throwback baits for sale, then they need to be following me either on Facebook or Instagram or both, because that's where I post it. Mm-hmm. And I can be reached by email if that's somebody's preference at coloradolures@gmail.com. And that's pretty much it. I am on YouTube. I haven't posted anything on YouTube in a really long time, but Colorado Custom Lures on YouTube also. If you want to see me what I look like 8 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, I noticed you haven't uploaded on that as much. I think your last video was like a year ago.
Yeah, that's one thing that I wish I had more time for was learning to edit video. I just can't. I can't squeeze one more thing in. Otherwise, I'd love to do some really cool stuff on YouTube and social media. It's just finding the time. So
Yeah, especially when you're already busy with all the KGBs you gotta pay.
yeah, between painting and kids, I'm kind of tapped out. So
Well, I'm so happy you could find some time to squeeze this in.
yeah.
Any last little bits that you want to hit on before we take off?
Yeah, I can't think of anything. Just thanks for having me, and yeah, it was fun.
No, this is perfect.